NASCAR banned the Boss 429 because Ford found a loophole and built an engine so powerful that officials had to change the rules just to stop it. Here is how it happened. In the 1960s, every car manufacturer wanted to win NASCAR races because winning meant selling more cars to regular people. Chrysler had the 426 Hemi and Ford had the 427, but Ford knew they needed something bigger. This was serious business and every manufacturer knew it. Cross the finish line first and regular people would buy your cars. That simple connection moved thousands of vehicles off of showroom floors, but it also created massive pressure. Ford saw what was coming. The Hemi kept winning and NASCAR kept evolving. Engines were getting more aggressive and playing it safe meant falling behind. Matching Chrysler was not the goal anymore and Ford had to go bigger. That is when Ford began building the Boss 429. Not for commuters, not for car meets, but to win in NASCAR. NASCAR required manufacturers to sell 500 street versions of any engine they wanted to race. So Ford saw an opportunity, build a race engine first and worry about the street cars later. That became the plan. Around this time, Ford hired Bunky Knudsen from General Motors and told him to build an engine that would dominate NASCAR, and he did not hold back. His instructions were simple: create an engine that dominates NASCAR completely. Forget about the budget, forget about drivability, just win. The result was an engine built to scream at a red line for hours. Comfort? Irrelevant. Street manners? Who cares? This thing was designed to live at maximum speed. Racing DNA filled every component from the valve train to the oil system. But there were two problems: NASCAR's 500 car rule and Ford's calendar was shrinking fast. In 1969, Ford convinced Richard Petty to switch from Chrysler, and he brought David Pearson, Donnie Allison, and other top drivers with him. They all ran the Boss 429, and on super speedways, nobody could touch them. The Mercury Cyclones and Torino Talladegas walked away from the competition. Atlanta Motor Speedway became a Boss 429 showcase. Nobody else stood a chance. Ford paired it with the Holley Dominator carburetor that kept the engine fed with air and fuel, and they went from competitive to dominant. But the engine that dominated at 200 miles per hour was a nightmare everywhere else. To meet NASCAR's 500 car rule, Ford had to shove the Boss 429 into Mustangs, and it was a disaster because the Mustang was never designed to handle an engine this big. The engine ran 13-second quarter miles, which was slower than Ford's cheaper Cobra Jet. The problem was simple: those huge cylinder heads were built for high RPM racing, not street driving or drag racing. Ford attempted to tame the monster. The first batch used a conservative cam and a smaller carburetor for street driving, but it barely helped. They tried again with revised internals to add some punch, still didn't really solve the problem. The issue wasn't the tuning, but what the engine was built for. Those enormous cylinder heads were engineered for maximum airflow at sustained high RPM. Cruising around town, they felt sluggish. At the drag strip, they couldn't generate the low-end torque that racers needed. Enthusiasts tried everything, but most eventually gave up and yanked the Boss out to drop in a reliable 427 because it actually worked. The engine dominating NASCAR suddenly looked completely wrong everywhere else. That disconnect only amplified the growing tension. By then, the Boss 429 had stopped being an engineering project. It had turned into a corporate power struggle. Inside Ford, this engine wasn't a suggestion, it was the mandate, the chosen path forward, and whether it made sense or not, everyone had to fall in line. Engines with proven track records got benched even when they were still delivering wins. Engineers saw the problems early, racers felt them immediately, but reversing course wasn't possible. Too much investment, too much ego, too much reputation on the line. So teams found workarounds. They dialed back the engines, swapped parts when nobody was looking. Some racers completely ignored the Boss and returned to older, trusted setups. Not publicly, quietly. The whole operation ran under intense pressure. That 500 car threshold had to be met. Meeting deadlines mattered more than perfection. Quality took a back seat to quotas. What should have been unstoppable became difficult to manage. Sometimes the tool built for dominance creates more chaos than success. Eventually, some racers stopped trying to control the Boss 429. They decided to unleash it. George Montgomery was one of them. Instead of working around the engine's quirks, he maximized its advantages: incredible airflow capacity, high RPM breathing. Then he bolted on twin turbos. The combination was devastating, and it performed exactly as planned. At the NHRA Gator Nationals in the early 70s, Montgomery's Boss-powered machine won the competition, repeatedly and convincingly. Everyone could see it, and so did the officials. Regulations tightened fast. New restrictions appeared. The message became obvious. This setup was not acceptable anymore. The Boss 429 had gone too far. It worked so well that it actually became a problem. Ford built something that didn't fit within the rulebook's boundaries. The power came too naturally, the edge was too clear, so the windows closed. That moment defined the Boss's 429 legacy. By the mid-1970s, everything changed again. NASCAR shifted towards smaller engines, chasing efficiency and tighter control. The Boss 429 suddenly had nowhere to go. Drag racing wasn't any better. NHRA started favoring small block engines and lighter platforms. The Boss was massive, heavy, and no longer welcome. Not because it lacked capability, but because the rulebook just simply moved on. Ford followed the trends. Development stopped, innovation ended. The engine that once terrified racing officials quietly disappeared. Even the most powerful engines become obsolete when regulations evolve. Then the resurrection happened. In 1981, Ronnie Sox brought a Boss 429 back to victory lane, claiming an IHRA Pro Stock Championship. Shortly after, Bob Glidden discovered what the engine was always capable of. At 500 cubic inches with proper tuning, the Boss finally delivered on its promise. From misunderstood to dominant, the story came full circle. The Boss 429 was designed to bend the rules and dominate racing. Officials feared it because it exploited every loophole, leaving competitors scrambling. On the street, it was misunderstood, and on the track, it was unstoppable. With its massive Hemi-style heads and iconic Mustang fitment, it became a symbol of raw engineering, genius, and controversy. Few engines inspired awe and fear at the same time. Its story has twists, secrets, and victories that still echo throughout racing history. Today, collectors see defiance, a moment when engineers pushed too far and forced officials to respond. And that tension between innovation and control is what makes the Boss 429 unforgettable. The Boss 429 was built to exploit a loophole, dominated when it worked, and got banned because of being too good. That is the real story that nobody talks about.